Plus, if you haven't understood the Pugmark method, you got 100 rupee bounty for shooting a tiger. Schools are slaughterhouses of children's curiosity.
I am not able to get it. Something which you basically worship, and same thing you are going to go and hunt.
That's the mating call of the bull gaur. Usually they turn and come back. So I am not a conservationist who opposes economic development. If you shot a tiger, the hunter and the tiger are married.
Didn't your father advise you to join somebody in Bombay as an intern?
Friend was Dhirubhai Ambani and the company was Reliance. The order comes from above, it is followed, which is very good for law enforcement and very bad for science. Post-independence, everything kind of collapsed. If I can roll the clock back a little.
Our guest today is a titan in the Indian wildlife conservation space. His pioneering work with camera trapping and radio telemetry redefined how tigers are counted in India. His work in the Nagarhole National Park is the longest running tiger study in the country. He has also authored several books on tigers and conservation philosophy. He has set up one of India's leading wildlife conservation organizations. His resume, publication and awards are far too long and far too many for this podcast introduction. He is the Padma Shri award-winning conservation zoologist, Dr. Ullas Karanth. Hey, over 90% of you watching aren't subscribed yet. Subscribe to Some Like It Wild and hit the bell icon to get updates on all our new episodes.
Sir, thank you for accepting the request.
My pleasure.
And every time I talk to you, from the first time I met you, I've been fascinated with your life. It's not easy to take a decision that you're not going to be an engineer, which you did, by the way, but take up a profession which was completely different. Now, I'm just going to go back on time because we spent a lot of time reading your books, and largely your time was spent in Nagarhole. He has been to Nagarhole. We have seen a different Nagarhole. You have seen a very different Nagarhole altogether, because we are talking about decades of work in that place. I want to talk about the time which you spent in Nagarhole, where you could walk, you could drive wherever you want, you could stay in the forest whenever you want. How was the life then?
There were several periods. Like I went to Nagarhole first time in 1967. I had got this brand new Java 250cc motorcycle as a gift from my father. And the first trip I made on that, one of the first trips, was to Nagarhole because I had heard about it. I had been to the forests in other places. I had been to Kudremukh in 1964. But I heard about this place and I had been not there. So I just started from Mangalore, went down on my bike and reached late evening. And next morning there was an elephant ride. So I went on elephant back to what is called the main watchtower now. It's actually Mavinhalla watchtower. This was in 67. In 60 it had been clear felled for planting teak. So it just had lantana and other weeds. And I saw a huge bull gaur there, and I may have seen half a dozen cheetal or something. That was all I saw. That was my first trip to Nagarhole. It's very different now. So the next time I went back, I think I had a letter from Mr. Shamsundar, who was my cousin. He used to be a DFO those days. He retired as PCCF and is dead now. He retired in 1990. I had a letter from him to the ranger or something. I remember I had a piece of paper. And I went to the ranger's house. The ranger's house used to be a little place which is now either demolished or modified beyond recognition. But the ranger was KP Achaya, Kityanda Achaya. He was a silver-haired man in his, I guess he was in his late 40s or early 50s. And he looked at me, had long hair. I was wearing this orange checked shirt and bell-bottom pants, and I was on a bike. And he said, "Why have you come here?" in a somewhat hostile tone. I said, "I've come here to watch animals. I love wildlife. I've been here before once, but first time I'm meeting you." "Oh, you've come to watch wildlife? That's okay. All people your age come here only to hunt. I catch them and put them behind bars," or something like that. Then he said, "Unfortunately, I can't give you the room. State wildlife officer, for whole of the state, there was one DFO,
Okay.
Mr. Marappa. He was staying there, so I couldn't stay there. Then my face fell. He said, no, you come and nanotik bandiru, come and stay with me. So I stayed with him, and evening he used to have this Bison brand arak. So I had a couple of Bison brand araks with him, and he was one of my early mentors. So next 3-4 days I hung around there. That particular day, buffalo calf had to be tied up as a bait in what is today Bison Road, they call, that place. And so that Mr. Marappa could go on elephant back and watch it next day. That was the plan. So I went with this Jenukurba watcher with the buffalo. We tied the buffalo up, came back. Of course, that tiger didn't come and take the buffalo. So next morning, Mr. Marappa left and I moved to Kaveri Lodge. And I spent 2-3 days, I just wandered in the forest with the guards and watchers, the beat guards and all that.
Did you also see your first tiger in Nagarhole?
No, that was much later.
Much later?
Yeah.
Okay.
See, if I can roll the clock back a little.
Please.
My wandering started I was born in Puttur. There was some reserve forest there. And then I spent my teen and all the years in Mangalore, which had more access to, I had a bike also. So I wandered in all these forests at least 5 years before I went to Nagarhole.
Okay.
So the Puttur were hikes from my own house to the forest. So saw nothing, heard one wild pig dashing off. That was all. Then Kudremukh made 3 or 4 treks between 1964 and 67 before this trip to Nagarhole. So again, these were all, each was an expedition-like thing. You park your bike in a place called Navur, and then to the peak, it is about 18-kilometer hike. It was quite a tough hike, and it was not all this wildcraft and fancy shoes, none of that. It was regular pants and shirt.
Canvas shoes or something?
Canvas shoes. So we went up, and it's a spectacular climb. You start with the lowland rainforest, then you go up, and then you start to the mid-level, and then as you go higher up into the grassland shola type of thing, you get that typical higher elevation. So when I went up to Tolali, it is about 5-6 kilometers below the peak. It's a flat area. And then our food was just making a wale, a kind of a stove out of stones, and cooking some ganji.
The basics. Yeah.
And, some upinkai, pickles, that sort of a thing. Very simple meal. So that was the first trip. And at night I heard some alarm calls. And also as you went up to the peak and explored around that grassland, you could actually see herds of sambar, herds of gaur, 5-6 sambar together, which you would never see anywhere, because this place was so high up. Snaring was not there. That was the main thing that killed wildlife, snaring. And hunters from down below would not come so far high up to hunt. So they were not hunted there. So their numbers were, first time I saw, kind of herds of sambar, and at evening they will emerge from the sholas. It was incredible. And at night I heard alarm calls. I said there was a predator moving. And morning we went up and searched, and actually saw the tracks of a tiger. That was the first time I saw a tiger. I'm saying a tiger track.
Yeah.
It shows you the scarcity, how scarce they were by then. They had almost gone to the verge of extinction by mid-60s. So I went to Kudremukh a couple of times after that, and I also went once to the Subramanya, Gundia areas where there was with hunters. There was a friend of mine who was interested in wildlife, but he was a hunter, and we used to keep arguing about it. And we went with this group with the dogs and chased the whole finally found one medium-sized pig, and that was brought home and cooked and all that. So wildlife was very scarce. So even in Nagarhole, when I went first, that was the scene. There weren't many animals. I went to Shimoga, for example, and I saw lion-tailed macaques in Agumbe on the way. I stayed with Shamsundar, who was then a DFO in Shimoga. And he took me to Hanagere Forest Rest House, sent me with the ranger to, show him some wildlife. This boy, he's my cousin, he's very interested. And we walked through teak plantations, and far away we saw one cow gaur. And she was kind of turned and looking at us. And this ranger called Ramarao puts his hand up like this against his mouth and yells out a yodel sound loudly. And she takes off and starts running, and he follows. And I run with him, and of course we lose her. And I said, Ramarao, why did you do this? And he said, no, that's the mating call of the bull gaur. Usually they turn and come back. This certainly wasn't a successful attempt at attracting her. So I came back and complained to Shamsundar, said, I was watching a gaur, your ranger ruined it. So he said, no, next time I'll take you to Shettihalli. So this time, he had a wildlife consciousness. He never hunted and he wanted wildlife protected. Laws were so loose those days, you wouldn't believe it. Anybody could hunt actually. There was no law against it. Only certain classified game animals like tiger and a few, you needed a permit to hunt.
Yeah.
That was all. This is what the British left us with, the law. Because they didn't want natives to have guns and all this stuff. Right. Wildlife was extremely scarce. That's the point that people don't realize, how much hunting was there, how things were scarce. This is the days before the Wildlife Act.
This is before 1969. So
no, see, the beginning for me in a time series way was Kudremukh in all the wanderings in around Puttur, and that was in early 60s.
Early 60s.
Kudremukh was 65, 66, 67. Then the Shimoga trip was also 67, 69, that area. Nagarhole trip was 67. Bhadra was 72. So basically, till the Wildlife Protection Act came and the enforcement happened, wildlife was scarce. So seeing a tiger was out of question. I mean, seeing one. I was seeing dead ones. People shot them and they paraded them in the streets.
Skin and
that was normal culture. Yeah. I am not blaming him. That's the tigers were killing cattle, and it was, but they were really scarce. They were almost gone.
The situation was really, really bad way back in 60s. No, so any of the forest, either South India or North India,
it was all the same. I had been to North India, but if you read George Schaler's intro part in Deer in the Tiger, because before he chose Khana, he has done an overview of it, which is a complete summary of what happened. Later, he wrote an article, I think it was in late 60s, for the Smithsonian magazine or one of the fancy magazines, where he really took all his notes out and described what it was everywhere the same. It was everywhere the same. Wildlife did survive because of remoteness, where people didn't go. And exceptionally, in parts of Rajasthan and Gujarat where people don't hunt, you would see cultural tolerance.
Yes,
but it is not widespread at all. It is now made out to be universal in India, which is nonsense. It was very specific to certain communities in certain areas. For example, black buck in northern Karnataka in some places. I'm elaborately answering your question. Seeing a tiger was not a granted thing like it is now. So it was very, very hard.
So there is something which I would like to ask here, because we talk about tiger being part of the culture, worship, Durga's, Vahan and all those things. That is one side of the story. Other side of the story is that we are hunting the tigers. I am not able to get it. Something which you basically worship, and same thing you are going to go and hunt. How did this happen?
Well, I think, as hunter-gatherers, everybody has hunted. Then settled agriculturists, after 10,000 years, you had to hunt either to eat the wild protein or to repel predators that ate your cattle. So hunting was widespread everywhere, without exception, most of the places, particularly if you look at India, except in parts of Gujarat and Rajasthan where people are vegetarians and didn't hunt, most of the people didn't eat meat, and there was this deeper tolerance. But that tolerance existed everywhere, and these religious icons of animals are very deep-rooted in different forms of Hinduism, the Vedantic Hinduism, the Dravidian variants that were there even before them, the Bhuta worship in Mangalore district. For example, you have tiger is a god, Pili Bhuta, Maisanda is Gaur, Panjurli is pig. These are the animals that actually were hostile to them. So in some sense, praying to them, one way is to propitiate them, in some sense. And what it does is, I don't think it stops from people from hunting or killing animals. Definitely anybody who's threatened with crop loss or depredation of big cats will retaliate. I mean, you go see this in Sundarbans also. There's Bon Bibi and some other tiger god, but a tiger comes out into a village, it's clobbered to death. But what is special about India is, large parts of India, of a genuine belief they have a right to live, like humans we do. So even people suffering depredations, people who mob leopards and club them to death, whatever they do, all the mass hysteria. But even when there is some family member is dead from elephant attack, if you tell them in a sober moment, should we then kill all wildlife and finish off all the elephants in Nagarhole and Bandipur? No, they need some place. They have to have some place. So that doesn't exist except in any culture. I have been to Buddhist countries like Laos and Vietnam, and you go to some of the animistic groups in Nagaland and whatever, this doesn't exist. But it does exist in many places where wildlife has actually come back. And to me, the key to this was when the very strong laws were brought in, very strong enforcement was enabled in the late 60s and early 70s, there was a public tolerance of it. But now it's gone. Now people don't want protected areas. It's kind of changed. But that enabled the establishment of this. But to answer your question, that's the thing. People worship them. People fear them sometimes. And that's why you have a temple for plague Maramma, for example. She's the goddess of plague. So there are different reasons why these evolved, but I think they do give a basis for modern conservation. Where such tolerance exists, it may be around small monasteries in Tibet. Wherever it exists, it helps you to start something, that is a plus. And the game hunting era you talked about came later with the firearms and, starting with the Mughals, that period. Then, of course, the British replaced them as rulers. This mass hunting of Mahesh Rangarajan has documented it very well. Like if I remember right, about 1,600 tigers per year were shot, average between 1875 and 1925, when tigers were still considered abundant. They were shot. And that includes game hunting as well as bounty hunting. See, we forget as many or perhaps more tigers were killed by being shot with illegal guns, snared, poisoned by people who suffered depredation. And bounty, you got 100 rupee bounty for shooting a tiger till 1965. That was the law. I knew a farmer His name was Ajjamada Changappa. He lived in a village called Kurchi. And without ever stirring from his village, between 1948 and 1965, he shot 27 tigers sitting over cattle kills. So it's hard to imagine the kind of
Scale of hunting.
and,
Yeah, it was a very different era altogether. There were different challenges altogether.
Yeah, the country had become independent in 47. I was born in 48, and in the mid-50s, people were starving to death. 60s, people were starving. There were food riots in places like Chitradurga and all, godowns being broken, people raiding. And in Bihar, people were starving, dying by the thousands. We used to see it in the news division, films division's newsreels, Bihar famine and things. So government had other priorities. They wanted to develop, they wanted economic growth, they wanted more food production. There was a campaign called the Grow More Food campaign in the Nehru's time. And that was the first time when gun licenses were given freely, called crop protection guns, because under British rule, other than privileged communities like Gurkhas and Kodavas who were not considered hostile to the regime, guns were very strictly controlled to Indians. This Grow More Food campaign made guns easily available, number one. Number two, after World War II, jeeps, the surplus jeeps, off-roaders, the first off-roaders came. They gave access to places where people couldn't go. Third, dry battery cells came. So instead of Petromax, you could have these spotlights. So all this kicked in at one shot, and post-independence, everything kind of collapsed.
Sir, I want to go back to, so you were born in 1948. I think till the age of 11, you were taught at home. And I think you didn't even study anything in English. I think you were just studying 2 subjects, which was taught by your father. And then you decided to go and do your engineering. And then you decided to become a farmer. How was this journey? Means, how did this whole thing happen?
My father was wandering around, and finally he settled down in Puttur, starting a school for... my father was very influenced by Maria Montessori, of this kind of education, not going to school, but being taught through experience, play with learning kind of thing. So he started an experimental school called Balavana. So he had a small zoo or a menagerie with the fenced area with one cheetal, one sambar, one black buck, peafowl. So all this was there. This was in the 30s, and he and my mother got married in 1936, and they were living in this area. It was about 2 miles out of Puttur town, which was a small town with a population of 3,000. So this was pretty. We had nearest household was about 3/4 of a kilometer from our house. It was a wooded area. There were a lot of birds and all. Not the big animals had all been. Occasionally jackals would come. Occasionally striped hyenas could be heard. So he had an interest in wildlife from a very young age, my father. As an aesthete, not as a biologist, but he liked animals. One of his younger brothers also liked animals. So he had been trekking to these places. He had been to Kodachadri. I think it was in the 1930s. He saw a tiger in Kodachadri. So he mentioned being stunned seeing a tiger coming down from Kodachadri. So anyway, he was a self-educated man. He dropped out of college, but he had enormous library of books, English books, Kannada books, but all the science and wildlife was all in English. There wasn't anything in Kannada. So we were homeschooled, all 3 siblings and I, till age 10, and then we were put to school, 6th grade. That was his model, my dad's model. So we had free time. There was a little bit of homeschooling in basic maths and Kannada, but that was it. But I had access to all this library and his interest in wildlife. I started watching, I was watching birds but frustrated because I didn't know what they were. So we had family friends. One of my mother's classmates was, her name was Vasanta Satyashankar, and she was a bird watcher.
Oh.
She had Salim Ali's, she gave me Salim Ali's 1955 edition of Book of Indian Birds with these atrocious paintings by Jal Irani or whatever. So she said, that's a tree pie. So, I started. And then, of course, within a few months, I counted about 100 species in Puttur around our compound. So it opened, again, another window.
So that was your start, basically.
That is how systematic. And my dad had National Geographic magazines from 1938, piles and piles of them. He started subscribing. So we had piles of those, all the popular science encyclopedias. And he wrote 2 sets of encyclopedias in Kannada, in 48 for children called Bala Prapancha, and one in the 60s called Vijnana Prapancha, which are 4 volumes in Kannada. By reading these, and he was not a scientist, but he was a science popularizer, and he was good in English, not in a way of speaking or writing brilliant English, but putting it into Kannada. So all that pushed my interest in towards wildlife and more into formal wildlife. But it was a lot of going out with the, what I talked about, going out, watching, unsystematic natural history, you could call it. But in 1965, in my father's collection of Life magazines, I read this article. I saw these spectacular pictures of tigers. 4 tigers killing a buffalo, water buffalo, feeding off a buffalo, by Stan Wyman. He was the famous, Life was a large format, spectacular magazine.
Yeah.
I saw, and I read the article was by George Schaller, a man called George Schaller.
So that's the first time you heard the name of George Schaller?
No, not the first time. My father used to subscribe to Scientific Book Club, Book of the Month Club, or one of them. They used to send these books. So then in 63, my dad gave me this gorilla book of Schaller's, which had come in the pop. And he said, look at this man. He's gone and stayed there and done all this. And I'd read the book, but it kind of stayed there. But when I read this article in 67, it blew me away, because I read, all the hunters, Dunbar Brander, Jim Corbett, all the stuff. My favorite was F.W. Champion, of course. So that was different. That was storytelling. And here was science asking questions, answering them, and using quantitative metrics. How much is the size, how many kills does a tiger make in a year? What's the number of prey animals per square? All in a crude way, but it was there. It blew me away. And I hated engineering because I had good grades. That was the only profession I liked to get into after PU. We had a 1-year PU, because the other option, so either you, in my generation, either you, in Mangalore, you became either an engineer or a doctor. So
I think that time, that was the only, or there were the only 2
at
options
least
there.
Yeah. Nobody thought much of IAS and all these other things. So to me, doctor was out of question. I was not interested in
humans,
looking after sick humans. It's a noble cause, but I didn't want to do it. So I said, I'll be an engineer and do wildlife as a hobby. So in 66, I read this, 65, and I said, this is what I want to do. Eventually, whenever it is possible, it may take me many years, but eventually this is what from that day I was clear I wanted to be a wildlife biologist.
Didn't your father advise you to join somebody in Bombay as an intern after your engineering?
No, what happened was, when I finished engineering in 71, my father was very closely associated with the Pai family of Manipal. Okay. And he was very close to Dr. T.M.A. Pai and his elder brother Upendra Pai. He had helped them get affiliation to the Manipal institutions when they couldn't get affiliation in Mysore. He was a cultural figure with a lot of following in North Kannada. They were very close. So Mr. T.A. Pai, who later became Industries Minister under Indira Gandhi, called him and said, Ullas has now done his engineering. What do you want to do with him? So he said, I'll ask him. I'm saying because one of my friends is starting a new textile company and it will do well. So I suggest he goes and joins as a managing trainee there. I can put in a word. My father asked me, I said, Mr. Pai is saying you go to Bombay and join this company. It'll be a good company to work in the long run. So I said, I don't want to go to Bombay. I want to go to Nagarhole, Kudremukh and all that. I go to Bombay. I hated Bombay. Nowhere near there's anything. I had a 4-hour ride to any forest I wanted. I said, I will stay in Bangalore.
Which was this company actually?
This company turned out to be, friend was Dhirubhai Ambani and the company was Reliance. So anyway, that's how I ended up in Bangalore.
You sold tractors?
No, before that I was in Robert Bosch, now it is called. It was called Motor Industries Company.
Oh, okay.
A very MICO. It was a very disciplined kind of a thing. You went at 7:30. Kind of, it's German efficiency, bordering on a prison camp. So 6.5 days, 5.5 days of work. So I did that for 2 years and I got really tired of it. I didn't like it. So
I'm actually surprised that you survived for 2 years there.
No, I had to, So my first princely salary was 375 rupees per month. So I had to earn a living. So then I was still not, that period I couldn't go as much to the forest. So I wanted a job where I could at least travel around, not stay in a factory. So my father had another good friend, GMM Manjunatha, who was the biggest private planter in Kodagu, a wonderful man. So Manjunatha's son was like an elder brother to me. He had a company called Agro Private Limited, which sold tractors and power tillers. So I went and said, I don't like this MICO job. I've quit it. What do I do now? I had quit it without having another job. So he said, can you give me a job? I said, yes, you join me. You can go out on a bike and sell tractors and power tillers all over Karnataka. So that's how I ended up in that job. But it was, what I could do was I could take my job and go anywhere, try sell tractors, etc. End up in a place close to
forest somewhere.
One of the Nagarhole or Bhadra or one of these places on weekends or whatever. So I meshed it nicely with my job. And I did that from 73 to 76. I remember when I was working in Agro Private Limited, once Mr. Mohan, I used to call him Mohan Mokanna, but GM Mohan, who was boss, he brought this young girl and said, there was another service engineer called Ashok, who was my friend. He introduced us to her and said, this girl is starting some interesting company. Please spare one of your mechanics and, whatever. So we spared one tractor service mechanic called Nazir or something, I forget the old man. He went and helped her start the company. And that was Kiran Majumdar. That is Biocon. So these strange paths I have crossed.
Yeah.
She's still a good friend. So anyway, that's how I ended up selling tractors and driving all over Karnataka up to Raichur.
In 76, you decided to become a farmer.
And as I was doing all this, I was still not finding enough time to spend in the forest.
Right.
And going towards Shaller's goal.
Yeah.
So this wasn't enough for me. So as I wandered around, I had an engineering friend, 2 years senior to me, called Shiv Kumar. He's from that area. He had started an agro service center where he sold agricultural products and hired tractors and things like that. So then the idea occurred to me because, the northern corner of Nagarhole, that Ane Chaukur, Allur area, that is where it is there. It was not the famous part of Nagarhole, but in 74 it was still part of the Hunsur Forest Division and part of the National Park by 1974. the northernmost part. So I thought, why don't I buy some land here, some 30, 40 acres, and farm, so that I would be even closer to the forest rather than going in a tractor, wandering around, etc. One place. So I had got married to my wife, Pratibha, by then, and I said, look, this is what I think I'm going to do. I'm going to quit this job and I'm going to start farming. He said, she's always been supportive. He said, fine, if that makes you happy, do it. And I talked to Shivkumar, and that area was coming into prominence as a for growing the highest quality tobacco, like Rhodesia, because it's not irrigated, it's light soil, and you get this incredible flavor. It's called Virginia flue cured tobacco. So I started, and the advantage of that was the crop was only 4 months. It was very intensive, very difficult. You had to cure it, cure the leaves, harvest the leaves in sequence. It was very difficult crop to grow, but it gave you more money than growing maize or ragi. And it was only 4 months in a year. So I had plenty of time to, so that's when we moved to Mysore from Bangalore. My wife did her PhD in Mysore at that time. And that's how I ended up farming. But that experience to me was the most important, because there's a lot of mythologies about rural societies and how they protect forests and nature and all. I was I was also in that period quite heavily influenced by Marxism. Gone deep into it, not as a practitioner, but read everything. And, I was a great admirer of Namboodiripad and Jyoti Basu, and particularly Leon Trotsky and his brand of Marxism. So I went and saw what was happening in the village, the inequalities and the destructive behavior of villagers. They were no different. I'm not saying they were bad. They were just like us, everybody else, maximizing their
revenues and
whatever.
Yeah.
And,
Earnings,
and people were cutting trees in their lands. They were cutting trees from the forest illegally for curing tobacco, because curing 1 kg of tobacco requires 8 kg of firewood. It's a very energy
intensive crop.
And I said, this is ridiculous. How can you, be a nature lover and do this? So we started getting firewood from Kodagu, which is coffee stumps, and, from... then I tried to organize a few of us to get coal from Andhra, Singareni to Kernagar by rake, and then So I was trying to change, but it was very hard in the face of the general populace getting fuel for free or destroying their own lands. And hunting was rampant. Nobody revered wildlife or anything. Everybody went snared, hunted, and So there was this reality check for me about the romanticized village and its love with the nature and its classless society and its... I remember in the 60s, 70s, well into the perhaps 80s, headloads of firewood coming out of to small towns was the biggest pressure on the forest. All of Bangalore's cooking needs were met by firewood. If you went on the coastal highway in North Canara, women on headloads. If you went to places like Periyapatna or Bhadravati, people going on bicycles, headloads, bringing the fuel. That large scale
Yes, I
has
agree with
changed
you, sir.
because of LPG.
Yes.
For 2 reasons. One, it's not the most healthy way of cooking at all. It's extremely dangerous to women's health. It's no fun. and the energy involved in cutting it, bringing it. So once the economy develops, this is a different story altogether.
Yeah.
But there's a rational explanation. This is why I support development, and particularly development of modern energy sources which don't have negative.
You have spoken about this in one of your books about the nuclear plant.
Yes.
Just close to the.
That was later.
Yeah, later. Yeah.
So that level of dependency was not there. But 76, it was still a very much ongoing phenomena. What has happened in lots of parts of central India, and it has not reached that stage of development yet. That dependency is still there, and that dependency is a bad thing. See, a lot of hunting was for protein. Those days, people went and hunted in Puttur, all these areas. Every evening, many men went with spotlights and guns to hunt something, a hare,
Whatever they get.
daytime, a giant squirrel, whatever they could get, because it was protein. Now, with the rising incomes and the threat of prosecution, a combination of carrot and stick, that changed completely. That kind of hunting is stopped now. There is luxury hunting of meat and all, but the level of hunting every damn thing that moved, which you still see in parts of eastern India and northeast India, has vanished because farmed protein has become
Staple diet.
First, the agricultural revolution has made chicken production, mass production cheaper. So you have every 100 meters a wire mesh chicken center. So, and people have the income to buy it. So these were the big threats to forests in the period I am talking about. One was firewood removal, second one was protein removal, hunting. Both have vanished because of development. They have not, the law has helped, but it's more than the law, the economic growth and development. That is why I'm not a conservationist who opposes economic development. I think there is no other way you can revert back to. Anyway, these are bigger philosophical issues, but they all have to have some data from your life.
Yes, 100%. So the farming, after farming, did you continue for a long period of time, or you decided at one point that I'm done with the farming?
I think it was in 79. One of the scientists there said, this Rotary International has a program called the Group Study Exchange, where they take 4 non-Rotarians led by a Rotarian and go to another Rotary districts. They have their own districts. And one group from there comes to this district, and they spend, I think it was 6 weeks or 8 weeks, I don't remember, a fairly long time, traveling between towns, staying, each person stays with a different family hosting him, not in a hotel. On the group leader as well as we were 5 of us. So we stayed with American families or whatever, foreign families. And then we engaged with people in our profession. Like if you are a farmer, you met a farmer or went to an agricultural station. You are a banker, you went, and the host would be anybody. They are not from your profession necessarily. They are different people, old people, young people. But you visited professionals, and then sometimes collectively in the town hall or someplace, you would all gather and interact with a bigger audience. It was to promote understanding between nations or some such thing. So this tobacco research scientist told me it's a good thing. Why don't you try to apply for that and be a part of that Rotary thing? So I did that. I applied this district which had Mangalore and Mysore, not Bangalore, but Mangalore, Mysore and that area. It was called District 318. So I was selected. Whatever the counter district in US was in the state of Arkansas. Okay, so we went there and we stayed with these families, and we even had a meeting set up to meet the youngest governor in America, Bill Clinton. But he wasn't there to meet us. We met his deputy. So it was a good experience. And I went to a wildlife department in a school, in a college, and I got a feel for the country. That's what it did, But I had a friend from Mangalore. His name was Balkrishna, but I used to call him Bucky. We all called him Bucky. Yeah, very witty guy. He said, after your Rotary thing, just come hang out with me for a month or so. Stay at my home. And it was in Madison, Wisconsin, which is really where the field of wildlife biology is foundationally started by Aldo Leopold, who was a forester from Yale, but he built this whole modern wildlife biology there. And I knew George Schaller had gone to grad school there.
Okay.
He had done his PhD from Wisconsin. I said, yeah. So I went to Madison, hung around with my friend, and he said, he used to actually work in the university, not as a faculty, but as a biomedical engineer. So he said, oh, I'll set up a meeting for you. And he talked to the dean of wildlife department, Professor McCabe, and set up a meeting for me with Professor McCabe. And McCabe was actually a PhD student of Leopold's and has written his biography, Aldo Leopold, the professor or something it's called. A very dignified man. He was also on the verge of retirement, I think. So he said, listen to me. So I was about 32 and I vented all my frustration with him. I read George Schaller in 1965. I've been trying to get into this field and I want to be really trained in this field, not go to colleges in India where they just don't have the resources to teach this. They teach traditional zoology, which is not what I want to do. What do I do? How do I get into this field? He listened carefully and said, but you're going to the field, are you keeping field notes? I said, yes. Every time I see a bird, time, date, that Schaller's diary kind of thing, I have it all. And so I had already done the Chikmagalur Bhadra survey. So I told him, I have all this stuff and I have read all these books. I have read Deer and the Tiger. I have read whatever I could lay my hands on. But I want formal training because none of this works unless you have a degree in it and you are tested in it. He said, young man, you do one thing. You will get into any college. Do you have the money? So I said, no, I need full funding for everything. I cannot afford anything like this on my own. So I said, then you have to interest some faculty member that you have the potential to be a good graduate student, which means you have to establish credentials in the field. So turn all your notes into scientific papers, publish them somewhere, scientific notes, build up your credentials. That will open doors for you. So I said, okay, good advice. Came back and started doing that. Wrote a paper about Bhadra and this lion-tailed macaque survey I had done. So meanwhile, Meva Singh and I went and did a survey of blackbuck in Ranebenur. I was asked to do it. I think there was no even funding. We just went and there was some controversy whether eucalyptus should be planted there or not, whether it's helping the blackbuck or not. And our findings were quite contrary. During the day, they hid there in the plantations. During the evening, they came out. In other places where plantations were not there, they had no hiding cover at all. Right. So their numbers were lower. So I had published this stuff. I had done the lion-tailed monkey survey also. And in 1983 was a real turning point. That was the centenary of the Bombay Natural History Society. So there was a big conference, wildlife conference. By then I had, I had made some connections. When Madhav Gadgil came to CTS, Center for Theoretical Studies, that was before CES was started. And he was the first person in the modern mode of looking at ecology, not necessarily wildlife biology, but quantitative behavior. For example, he made a presentation on behavioral sampling of cheetal in Bandipur. It was modern science. So I used to go and spend time with him. And through that, I got to know his... I remember once I went there, Krishnan I had always admired among Indian naturalists who saved wildlife or raised their voice for wildlife. For me, EPG, Zafar Fateh Ali and M. Krishnan were three who were clear on where they stood and who spoke when nobody was speaking. So I met Krishnan there for the first time, M. Krishnan, and I also met Ram Guha, who had at that time just come back from Yale or whatever in Madhav's thing. So, these connections were developing, and I met Sukumar, who had just begun to work with Madhav, Ranjit Daniels, all these guys. So this BNHS organized a conference in 83, I think it was in December, centenary. I remember Sukumar and I traveled by train from Bangalore to Mumbai, stopping at places like Kadur and Davangere, whatever, it took forever. And I attended the meeting. It was an incredible gathering. Big chiefs on the stage were Dylan Ripley, Salim Ali, and Bunsang Lekagul, who was a medical doctor in Bangkok, who played a foundational role. He was a hunter and a medical doctor in the wildlife recovery in Thailand in the 80s. Dr. Bunsang Lekagul, then were a few other people. They were the senior honchos. I also knew the Smithsonian had done, this was 83. In 73, they had started a tiger project, tiger telemetry project in 71 in Chitwan. That was the first study of tigers, almost one of the first applications of radio telemetry in India. And Dylan Ripley, he loved India, he had good connections with Mrs. Gandhi, everybody. He was a world stature person. He wanted to do the study in India, in Kana, because by then tigers had started coming back, at least in places like Kana. There were tigers. No, it was not like the time Shaler did. But it would involve telemetry, all these modern techniques. And the Project Tiger people, hats off to them, had done a terrific job. The first few director, Sankla, and the first field directors, Pawar in Kana, Debroy in Manas, and Wesley in Karnataka, Bandipur, they had all done terrific job. But Kailash Sankla didn't like modern wildlife research. He did not like telemetry.
You thought it was too invasive? Or?
No, it is just, first, these are all newfangled things. We already know everything. The Pugmark is giving us all the data.
All the information, whatever you need.
Yeah, why do you want all these things? This is all Westerners coming and, needless. I'll come to that later because I met him later at that time. So, but anyway, when this project went, although Mrs. Gandhi wanted it, it didn't make it past the bureaucracy.
Oh.
Then they got tired. They had the money, they had everything, and their scheme was this. There would be one Western expert, he'll be matched with one IFS officer, and they will route the field here that way in the system. It was a wonderful idea. So then they went to Nepal, and Nepal said, please come. And they implemented the Chitwan Tiger project for 10 years by then. Mel Sundquist and John Seidenstickers were the pioneers of their generation in telemetry, because telemetry was invented by Cochrane in University of Minnesota. The first, put it on a mouse, track it kind of a thing. And Mel was a student there, undergraduate student at that time. And Seidensticker had done the first, he had first worked with Craighead brothers, who were the pioneers in radio collaring bears, grizzly bears. Then he had worked with Maurice Hornocker, who studies pumas using, he caught them, so he tracked for Maurice, and he did the first major telemetry study of pumas. Magnificent piece of work on in Idaho, national primitive area, Seidensticker. So then after him, Mel came, and Mel was a whiz in telemetry, he was incredible, not only also in capture, because he had worked for Smithsonian.
He had the experience.
He was at the time of the meeting, but that was his PhD. So I was primed. So I wanted to meet all these characters. And there was a large contingent of people from the Smithsonian, because Ripley was attending. So it was an incredible gathering of Western tiger scientists and tiger-related work from. So all these people were there, and I said, this is where I should get my PhD advisor who will give me funding and this is the time. So that's where I connected with Seidensticker, but he didn't have a university affiliation, but he was always my mentor after that. I connected with Mel, and I had done something at that time which was simply look at numbers of tigers and prey reported from Indian parks by the Pugmarks census and the forest department beat counts or whatever. And I had shown there is no match at all. There is no correlation. I had done an analysis and I shared that with them. And I had lots of questions about tigers. I had a lot of experience with tigers by then, just in the jungles, whatever. So he said, no, I'll take you as a student. I'll somehow get you everything. You have to get a high score in GRE because you are a non-resident of Florida. So he had just moved to Florida from the Smithsonian. So to get that only departmental scholarship, you have to get a very high GRE score. So, all right, I said, we'll follow that. So then I met Rudran. He and Chris Wemmer, they also became my mentors. And they said, you should take this course. This is free. You'll get your air ticket. You can come to US for 2 months, take this techniques course where you learn radio telemetry, you learn basic ideas, etc. So you apply. So that's how I ended up in the Front Royal course. And the course was very intensive, field intensive, line transects, radio telemetry, capturing possums and raccoons, tranquilizing them, catching rats, all the basic techniques of wildlife, which nobody would be teaching in India. I learned there. The course was really good. And then Mel Sundquist, I was studying for GRE and all that. So he said, why don't you come over, work with us in the field? They were doing a massive study on raccoons and possums and radio tracking and all. You can do that. And you can also, I'll introduce you to the faculty at Florida. So you're not just a name, but a face to them. All you have to do is fly. And I went and spent 2 weeks with them. Radio tracking, catching, how do you use a choker pole, how do you handle an animal. Because Mel was a real master in this stuff, all managing stuff. It was very good field exposure. And also we became real friends. I was very sure if I got a GRE score, I'll somehow get in here. Mel will get me in. And I went and met all the faculty. So faculty at Florida, they had built an incredible wildlife program, which was unmatched by any other university. So I realized this was the place I wanted to go. I'll get the kind of education I needed. So, and I came back and Mel and I immediately applied for funding, joint funding. So I started doing field work with that funding. Basically doing line transect surveys in the proper way they should be done and all. So 86 I started doing that. And in between I got an invitation to go to Minnesota for a tiger conference. So I had just done these experiments in Mysore Zoo with the Pugmarks census. See, what happened when Project Tiger was launched, formally launched in 73, but the planning for it went on ahead of time. Indira Gandhi put Karan Singh as the chairman. He was a young, dynamic minister, and Sankla was put as the first director, and he selected some of these other people to be directors of specific parks. And one of them, Saroj Raj Chaudhary, S.R. Chaudhary of Odisha, was director of Simlipal. He had enormous field experience. He had hunted tigers. He had kept and raised a tiger called Kerry, and there's a film about it and all that. And he had invented this method, formalized it, so to say. Actually, the first person who tried to use tracks, see, tracks were used to know the presence of tigers, but to say how many there are was a forest officer called Nicholson in the 30s in Bihar. In the summer, when they were the Palamau or somewhere, when all waterhole died, he made sure somebody went there and looked at tigers coming to drink in the previous 24 hours. And he had noted all that carefully, and depending on distance, he made guesses that this would be a different tiger, it's too far to whatever.
Track.
So that was some attempt to count tigers from tracks. Then, Jim Corbett talks about Bachelor of Algar, all that is true. If there are deformities and all that, it's not that you can't do. It's also true that if there are 2 tigers, you are more likely to do it. When it goes to 10 tigers, your identification becomes uncertain. But Forest Department being Forest Department, Saroj Raj Chaudhary says it, so this is the method we will use. So that became the method. Once the order comes from above, it is followed, which is very good for law enforcement and very bad for science. So Pugmark method was invented, and the first All India broad survey of tigers, how many there are, the question came up. And they did the first one and came up with the number of 1871, exact number, in the first, whenever it was done, early 70s. But before that also, Saroj Raj Chaudhary had published the method in Indian Forester and all that. So it became the standard method for counting tigers. But I had gone to Nagarhole, and after that I had met Chinnappa in 69. And then on, I have been in the field with his trackers, with him, and we looked around and we were very confused by the track. So many factors affect the shape of a track: substrate, the speed at which it is walking, the slope, soil, hundreds of things. So how actually can you...
You can't accurately.
You can't do it. And I had, in 82, I had been to the service. There was a forest officer mad about wildlife in Karnataka called C.H. Basappanawar. He used to do a lot of photography, but sit in hides for hours together. I had a bunch of forest officers who were 10 years older than me and were like my elder brothers, several of them. So this Pugmark census and all was going on, and by then I had figured out this is not working. And there was a forester called Jayendrappa, who later he was a field guy. So I took him aside and said, does this really work, Then he says, Naan Pugmark tandu kodತೀನಿ sir, naan prashne kelodilla. I will bring the Pugmark, but counting tigers is not my job. I said, why are you saying this? He said, I had followed the tracks of a single tiger, taken multiple Pugmarks from it and given it once to not Basappan or somebody earlier. And then he started saying, this is this toe is like this, and he was classifying it. And I said, sir, it's from the same tiger. No, you don't know anything. This is Saroj Raj Chaudhary's method. So you just bring the tracks, I will decide. So then, so I knew this was going on. So that is when I said I should do a test of this idea. So Krishna Gowda, C.D. Krishna Gowda, who ran the Mysore Zoo, he was like a king there for years together. I used to go to the zoo a lot. I had met him in the 60s whenever I came. So he liked me because I was mad about animals. He actually liked animals. He would whistle, call the gorilla by name, it'll come trotting and all that. So I said, I want to do an experiment, Chinnappa and I will come. We want you to help your keepers move the tigers between, they have these narrow passages they create. So I set up and have some tigers move back and forth on soil which we laid. And we had 2 kinds of soil, one dusty soil and one little muddy soil. So we had some tigers go on them, and we took the left Pugmark or whatever was supposed to be done. We followed the protocol. And I shared the tracings with the 9 experts in Karnataka, Pugmark experts, who were considered the experts. So they all gave, only one guy was very clever. He never got back to me with an answer. But 8 of them, they gave me estimates. And they ranged from 8 tigers to nearly 20 or 30 or something. I don't
Some
remember
number,
the
yeah,
exact, very high number. And actually there were only 4 tigers. So I wrote a paper about it and showing actually it, in a blind test it doesn't work. And so based on that, they had invited me to this meeting in Minnesota for the Global Tiger meeting. So it was a good meeting where I presented my paper. Everybody liked it. And it later came published as Tigers of the World, for which George Schaller wrote a foreword and cites in his foreword saying, this is a very interesting paper, basically showing. And Pawar was very, very generous. Normally a forest officer, publicly some youngster, 15 years, 10 years younger than you is criticizing you, they get angry. He wasn't angry. He gave me a hug. I said, Ullas, you haven't understood the Pugmark method, but you are for conservation. He was very positive. So I had that paper, Pugmark paper. That's how that experiment started.
Sir, you spoke about Chinnappa. We haven't introduced Mr. Chinnappa in our podcast yet. So the audience will be very confused. Who is KM Chinnappa?
Yes. See, what happened was, Achaya was the person
Yes.
I knew. So he was somebody I kept in constant contact, and he was from the Kodava community. All the surrounding planters, rich planters mostly were Kodavas, and they all, game meat hunting was a tradition for them. For weddings and all, you had to have wildlife meat. And, if you shot a tiger, the hunter and the tiger are married in a ceremony called Nari Madhve. The tiger is called Nari in Kodava language. So it's kind of, it's a very much a part of their culture. He was a demobilized, he grew up in a village called Kurchi, where he had, not Kurchi, Tortapa, and he had shot a tiger, then joined the army. He was in Mountbatten's army, which had gone and come back. So he was he became the elephant forester, because elephant, he got used to this elephant care, because in the army also they had some supply.
He also had a very unique style of capturing elephants.
Yeah. So then he came back and became an elephant forester in Titimati. So there were 2 ways of capturing elephants. One that is very famous is the one G.P. Sanderson brought from Bangladesh and adopted to Karnataka. That is the Kedda method, which is mass capture, where you harass the herds, gather them for 15 days or a week and drive them into this big stockade near Mastigudi. It was dreadful. Out of some 1900 elephants they caught in Keddas, I think 10% or so died. In South, traditionally in Kerala and Kodagu and South Canara, there was a pit method, where you dig a pit, put soft soil underneath, but deep enough so the elephant can't climb, cover it with some thin bamboo, thatch, and put something attractive for the elephant to come. And the elephants come and fall into it.
Like a trapdoor.
No, it just collapses and the elephant is
like
in
you
this
have a
pit.
huge well.
It's called the pit method.
Yeah.
So that way you don't have 30 elephants to train at a time and things like that, where it's where the brutal thing happens, taming these wild elephants and beating them, hurting them. So the single elephant is looked after, trained, and if it is not useful, it's let go. If it's a big male which you can't train, you let it go by filling the pit. So Achay had caught dozens of elephants using that. He was a master in this, more than wildlife, that elephant care and elephant. He loved elephants, and there was a semi-albino elephant in Mysore Zoo that he had caught in Titimati in a pit. It was there for many years. Now it's not there. So anyway, so I would talk with Achay about all this, and his technique was to appeal to the women who came, show them. Wildlife had started coming back, cheetal and all. This is mid-60s, you could start seeing them. Said, don't cook it at home if your husband brings it, or get somebody to bring it. So it's kind of a Gandhian revolt against. Anyway, he was... and there was one local planter called Palekanda Ayanna, whose faith estate, his father was a earlier with the British people as a manager. Then they were very fond of wildlife, the family. Father was a hunter, but Ayana loved wildlife. So he would come. He was older than me. He would come, and he and Achaya and I were a small group. So Achaya was telling me all this, and I said, look, in this condition, if you retire, you would retire in 1974, in another 6 years. What happens to wildlife? I don't know what will happen. Nobody who will save it. I said, no, there must be. No, there is one boy called Chinnappa, youngster. He is in Kallala range in the timber division, timber part of the operations. He is incredible. He's staying in the forest. He's patrolling the forest. He's ruthless. He can protect this. If he is brought here and told to protect wildlife, he will do. So I said, but then you must do something. Anyway, I will request the DCF, Mr. DFO, Ramchandra Chetty, to post him here. Because at that time, no minister, nothing. This was all done at that level. So luckily, that's what happened. Next, in 69, because he had to be trained and groomed by Achaya. So Ramchandra Chetty posted Chinnappa to Nagarhole. So next time I went, Achaya introduced me to him and said, you go to the forest with him. We went. And he was incredible, his field craft. He had learnt it from the Kurubas, but he was extraordinary. And he was a marksman. I mean, he didn't shoot any animals, but he was deadly with the gun. Terrific guy. And I had this binocular and this bird book, and I was watching birds and all. And he said, what are you doing? I said, this is what, So he started learning bird watching. He also had another friend called Jeevan Rao from Bangalore, who was interested in natural history. He had his own, Achaya had his own small fan club, and which transferred to Chinnappa. So that was this Jeevan Rao, couple of other people. There was a shop called Gun Craft. There was Sundar Raj, his son, Udankar, he's dead. Jeevan is alive. So all these guys used to come. So Chinnappa and I, our friendship began that way in 69. And it grew because of a shared passion, and all through the years till he left the department in 1990.
Yeah, I just have, there's very important, one of the books, I think the first book itself you mentioned about that, the fascination with the natural world. When we are young,
It's none. Yeah, it's there.
It's there.
In every child.
And then it just disappears.
Yeah.
And specifically, you have clearly mentioned about the Asian cultures compared to the Western. It disappears in the Asian cultures. Obviously, India is part of it. But in West, it continues. I was thinking about it, at why it happens, that why we lose, because as a kid, we are playing with different soft toys, which is animals or cats and dogs and all those things. We are seeing them, and then there's like a cut, and you just forget of all the love what you had, or the fascination what you had for the natural world.
I think there are two elements to it. I think fundamentally, the deeper cultural thing is, all this kindness and gods, it's all true, but there is very little curiosity about wider nature. Few spectacular animals are revered and things like that. But we have 1,200 species of birds, and how many do you have names in any Indian language? It doesn't exist. That came from outside, Mughals, and more finally really with the Westerners. So we really didn't have it. Even the communities that hunted, tribals, etc., it was restricted to a few species that they ate or that harmed them, or they
were interacting with.
It was utilitarian rather than true curiosity. So one is that cultural factor. The second one is what my father used to say: schools are slaughterhouses of children's curiosity. Because he had run this school, he had run camps for kids, all based on nature, handling types of sand, everything. Kind of encourage the curiosity in the child and make him seek, combine play, make him seek, learn from around him, not just nature generally, not through textbooks. So what happens in this case is, in the West, first that curiosity element of the society, every school will have a natural history class, teachers who can take. How many zoology teachers can go and identify birds, or botany teachers can identify trees? Very little in our school system. So it's a combination of two. What happens is, once they go to school, their textbooks are dreadful. You don't talk of elite schools in Bangalore. I'm talking of the average schools, and particularly of that earlier years. Even now, there's nobody. See, that teacher and the material has to create that, nurture that curiosity. In the absence of it, it gets deadened and dies. That's why it happens.
That's a sad part of it. I think
one of the interesting
system...
things that my daughter Kriti is doing is this Wild Chalet program, which is directed only at forest communities, and it is directed at children in collaboration with the education department in terms of permissions and things, where they are given material, they are given these classes to nurture curiosity. It's amazing how kids will absorb this once they are taught how to.
Yeah, I think we need a similar kind of programs in the urban areas also. What Kriti is doing.
No, urban has a lot more actually.
Yeah, but my take was that when we look at the urban scenarios, we are very much disconnected with the wildlife. That's my feeling. Because we are so busy in our lives that we just ignore. So the connection what you have with the wildlife as you're growing up, it just goes off. Like if the person has moved from a smaller town to a bigger town, then he's just in a rat race. He's just looking at his livelihood, his whatever so-called great life in the city, and he forgets about the wildlife, about the natural world. That's what is my feeling.
Partly true, but also the access to material now, if you are interested on YouTube or whatever.
Access is there,
all
sir.
the wonderful David Attenborough films.
100%.
It is all there, which wasn't there earlier. So
I completely agree with you. Access is there.
Yeah.
Intent. At the school level, like if I remember going to my...
they're overloaded with the curricula now.
Yeah, that is what I was coming to. So let's talk about the whole tiger science. We have spoken a lot about your early life. Let's talk about it. So you have gone to the Florida.
I'm there now. Okay, I'm just there in Florida.
Okay, so let's move from there.
This was just part 1 with Dr. Ullas Karanth. But stick around for part 2 because he dives deep into the difficulties of working with tigers and being a conservationist in India. Subscribe and turn on your notifications so you don't miss it.